Andrew, occasionally we have a show where we feature a guest that's so big, so huge, that we have to shamelessly use the echo effect. And so on today's show, we're interviewing Nolan Bushnell. Now, who's Nolan Bushnell? Nolan Bushnell was Steve Jobs' first boss. You know the guy who started Apple?
That guy?
This was Steve Jobs' first boss.
Whoa.
This guy's the founder of Atari. You know, like the godfather of video gaming?
Ooh,
This guy's the former owner who scaled and grew Chuck E. Cheese.
The Chuck E. Cheese?
Yes, and on today's show, he shares why uninformed decisions are toxic, why you always have to be a little bit paranoid to be a successful entrepreneur, how he founded the video game industry, why Steve Jobs was the hardest working employee on the planet, and how he went from repairing TVs to starting Atari to growing Chuck E. Cheese, and why you must work to learn and not just to earn if you want to become super successful. All this and more on today's edition of the Thrivetime Show on your radio and podcast download.
Get ready to enter the Thrivetime Show.
We started from the bottom, now we hit. We started from the bottom and we'll show you how to get here. Started from the bottom, now we hit. We started from the bottom, now we hit.
We started from the bottom, now we're on the top. Teaching you the systems to get what we got. Colton Dixon's on the hooks, I break down the books. Z's bringing some wisdom and the good looks. As the father of five, that's why I'm alive. So if you see my wife and kids, please tell them hi. It's the C&Z up on your radio. And now 3, 2, 1, here we go!
We started from the bottom, now we hit. We started from the bottom and
Yes, 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 and yes! Thrive Nation, we are in the air everywhere, and I mean this sincerely from the bottom and the side of my heart. I have never been more excited than for today's show. This show today, let me tell you, folks, many of you grew up playing Atari. You played Atari. Many of you played video games. Many of you have been to Chuck E. Cheese. This guy here, Nolan Bushnell, he is the founder of Atari. He's the godfather of video gaming. He was Steve Jobs' first real boss, the great Steve Jobs. This guy was his first real boss. Nolan, welcome on to the Thrivetime Show. How are you, sir?
My pleasure to be here.
So, Nolan, I got to ask you here, Atari, it's such a big company, massive success you've had in so many different industries, and we're going to get into that. But where did you come from? Were you beamed here, or what was your life like growing up? You've done so much. How did you grow up?
I basically was born and raised in Utah and went to the University of Utah. And I've often said that life is more serendipity than planning. And that I think I was the only electrical engineer in the world that had managed a games department of amusement park while pursuing an engineering degree. One serendipity. Two serendipity, Dr. Evans was the only tenured professor that was focused on connecting video screens to big computers, and founded Evans and Sullivan Computers. And he basically was responsible for what they call the 9 Utah brats, which are Alan Kay, Bob Warnick, Jim Clark, basically the sort of the center of gravity of graphics. I mean, they had a Pixar, came out of Utah. And I was the guy who did the games based on some of the technology that we learned at the university, which was, cutting edge.
You worked at the Lagoon Amusement Park while attending college. What job did you have there?
I started out on the Midway selling balls to knock over milk bottles for a quarter.
Were you a taunter? Did you taunt people? What was your strategy?
Yeah, it was well, taunt is not the right word. Persuade, perhaps.
Okay.
But the real trick was human psychology. So, for example, you were supposed to run your game at 33 1/3%. So that says that for every dollar you came in, you gave away 33 cents of prizes.
Okay.
And you could control that by how you set the bottles. Like if I wanted you to win one, I could make it so that a hard breeze would knock the bottles down. If I didn't want you to win, I could set the bottles so where it would take a nuclear blast or a major earthquake. So we had a dance, a place where we'd have, Johnny Cash, even Elvis, what have you, come in and put on a concert. And so that would be date night. Well, one of the strategies I used was if the captain of the football team and the head cheerleader came to play the game, he'd generally have as part of his entourage the water boy and the librarian. I would give an animal or I would make sure that the water boy and the librarian won the animal. That meant that I had the captain of the football team every penny that he had.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Upside down.
That's the move. That's the move. And the thing is you at a very young age, you learn these skills, you take these skills. Every one of these skills you learned built upon itself. And at some point you had the thought, okay, I'm going to start a video game company. Where did you start it? I mean, did you start actually just physically building an apparatus of some kind? Were you tinkering? Was it in a garage? How did you start Atari? Where did you start Atari?
Started Atari in my daughter's bedroom, and it was really about what had happened is MSI chips in the space of 6 months went from $2 a piece to 15 cents a piece. And all of a sudden I said, hey, I believe I can hit the price points to make a video game.
Got it.
And so I started doing it, building an artifice, and in probably 2.5 weeks, I got a rocket ship flying on the screen. And I showed it to I had no money. I was associate engineer at Ampex at the time, making $880 a month.
Wow.
And I showed the prototype to a company called Nutting Associates, and they licensed it. And I came and went to work with them after signing a royalty agreement and put Computer Space into the market. Finished it off.
What year was this?
This was 1970.
So when did the first Atari game come out? The first game that was your Atari brand?
June 72.
June 72. And what was that first game?
Pong.
Pong was the first. Okay.
Oh, so good.
Now, when you came
Great
out with your
game.
first game, 1972, a lot of things had to happen. How did you get the capital needed to build this first company? Where did you get because so many entrepreneurs reach out to us and they say, man, you guys have had success in different industries. Where did you get the capital? We just had a listener today, actually, that emailed in about this. And I always tell people, 1, get 3 jobs. 2, live super cheap. These are moves. But there is other ways to raise capital. But how did you raise your initial capital?
Basically, my initial capital came from my back pocket. We were capitalized the company at $500.
Got it.
I put in $250. My partner put in $250, and that was all the money that we raised until we were at about 30 million in sales. This was kind of before venture capital had been invented. Just to put
Right.
in context.
Did you ever meet Bill Draper, the kind of the godfather of venture capital? Did you ever meet Bill?
I did. In fact, I had a opportunity to. He didn't invest in Atari, but he was part of the. He was, he kind of could have, but didn't.
Now, you had, you're doing $30 million a year. Now, again, people aren't maybe aware of inflation, but inflation is the gradual decrease in the value of money as government continues to print money they don't have. And so the $30 million in 1970, when were you doing $30 million a year of sales? What year would that have been?
74.
74. So in today's dollars, Aaron, you can look that up on the inflation calculator.
I'm working on it right now.
That would be hundreds, maybe 150 million today of revenue. I mean, it's a large. I mean, right? I mean, that's a large number.
Yeah.
At what point did you hire Steve Jobs?
Actually, 1974. But and Al actually hired him, but he and I became subsequently good friends.
Al hired him. And who's Al?
Al Alcorn was my head of research or head of design.
Now, I am not going to disrespect a dead man. I'm just kind of quoting some things from Walter Isaacson's book he did with Steve Jobs, which I believe to be accurate because he and Steve worked together on the book. But Steve kind of described himself as being an unusual character at the time he was working for you. Could you maybe explain the character? How old was Steve Jobs, and what was he like as a young man?
He was 19 or 20, I think, maybe 21 at the end. He actually worked for me 2 times. He started out, and then he took a hiatus and went to India to study with a guru, and then he came back and worked for Atari again. And he was disheveled, not well kempt, and a little bit obnoxious. I mean, Steve tended to not abide fools gladly. He if he thought you were a dumb he would tell you so. That's not a good way to make friends.
Now, my understanding with Steve is that Steve, in his book, he talks about he really, came to get something done, and he loved working with A players, and he just couldn't stand B players or C players. He had a real hard time with it.
Absolutely.
I want to make sure the listeners get something they can apply as a result of this. Are there any character traits that you would say, okay, that's why Steve Jobs did well? If somebody out there is listening and they're at that young age where they have to decide, am I going to go this path or that path? Is there any character traits that you observed from Steve Jobs where you maybe have thought, well, that guy's going to go on to be successful?
He was the hardest worker I've ever had work for me. He was one of the few guys that I'd come in on a Monday morning and he'd be asleep on a futon under his desk. He basically had one speed, full on, get it done, make it happen. And I think that is a characteristic. You can't be smarter than anybody, but you can outwork everybody.
True. So good.
That's powerful. Now, there's somebody out there that is wondering in the background where you are. Do you live in California? Where exactly do you live?
Los Angeles.
In Los Angeles? And can you describe the room you're in for people out there that maybe can't? A lot of people just listen to the show. Some people watch it. What are we seeing behind you?
This is a lab that I have in which I'm essentially surrounded by computer screens, and I have all kinds of little cubbies that are full of things like resistors and capacitors and Arduinos, and basically I solder here. I can
How many screens do you have in front of you? How many screens do you have?
7.
7. Okay. 7 screens. And why do you have 7 screens?
I think the visual bandwidth is an important thing for efficiency. So when you're on a desktop, you're really not looking at pictures like this. You really want it to be like this so that you can scan things with your eyes. So like I have one screen that is strictly email. I have another one that is all my calendar information and then my work day stuff. And then I watch, then there's one that's a news feed.
Now, Randy Pausch wrote the book called The Last Lecture, and he was basically oddly healthy, but he knew he was going to die. And he wrote this lecture, and he talked about how having multiple screens is really, he's a Carnegie Mellon professor. He talked about multiple screens allows you to be much more efficient. I am right now working, I have 4 screens in front of me. And I think just even going to 2 screens is so powerful.
Yeah. How big are your screens?
My first screen in front of me, the one I'm looking at you at now, is I would say 40 inches. The one to the right where I keep extra notes finding to pull in data or citations, that one's about 30 inches. The one to the left of the one I'm looking at right now, that's about 35 inches. And then I have a Mac that's, again, about 30 inches. So 30, 35, 40. How big are your screens?
You've got some good bandwidth. Now, another question. Are they all the same resolution?
They're not all the same resolution.
Okay. Because what I find is that there are certain things that I want a lot of data, but I don't need a lot of clarity. In other places that I want a lot of clarity. And, so if I'm reading something, I want it it's basically a screen that amplifies the size of everything. And so I like to have that flexibility of choosing quickly and easily the resolution that I'm looking at.
What I'd like to do, if I could, and this will be probably the most unusual interview of all time, but I have so much I want to ask you, and I want to try to go big and then kind of get into to some of the habits and details and routines you do, because I think there's a lot to learn there. Can you maybe share with the listeners, because you didn't just build Atari. It wasn't like, okay, that was it. You went on to then be the Chuck E. Cheese guy. And then you went on to, can you kind of just give us, if you were sitting there giving us a recap of your career, could you maybe share with us all the things you've been able to do? Because it's truly fascinating, and I'd love to hear it direct from you.
Okay, my first big entrepreneurial thing was I was a TV repairman when I was 10 and 11. And I set up a TV repair route in the days when, everything was a house call because the TVs were big and bulky and heavy. And so I always got used to having a lot of money, even though I was a poor boy from Utah.
Got it.
But compared to my friends, I always had more cash.
Yeah.
Then I did am I going back too far?
No, this is great. This is great. This is your world. I'm just invading your space.
And then I started a thing called the Campus Company, which created a blotter that had the calendar events for the university and sold advertising around the edge. And that the economics there were I could sell about $3,000 worth of ads, and it cost me $500 to print, and I'd give them away at the beginning of every quarter. And it was really a good business. I mean, in college, I was putting myself through school and driving a 190 SL Mercedes.
Wow.
And
Nice.
so that was how I came to work at Lagoon. And my theory was I was making so much money, the worst thing I could do is have summer nights free in Utah, because I would spend it all on girls and fun.
Yeah.
And so I said, I'm just going to get a fun job that just keeps me occupied and out of harm's way. And so therefore I ended up at Lagoon, which was a minimum wage job, which, but then I found out that you got commission if you went over quota. And I found that I was pretty good. And so I was, I basically was doubling my salary based on quotas.
There's a teaching moment there that I want to make sure the listeners get. People always ask me, they'll say, Clay, why are you volunteering? There was a church back in the day. I volunteered, and I would do the voices for the puppets. And people would say, why are you, in your late 20s, financially successful, why are you doing voices for puppets at a church service when no one knows it's you? And I'm going, I just feel like in the future, that is a skill I want to learn, is how to switch voices. Not really knowing how that would work. And then people say, you're a disc jockey. Why did you go from disc jockey to dentistry? Why did you invest in dentistry? And I'm going, well, I had some teeth that needed to be fixed, wanted to get myself. And I figured if I'm going to get veneers, I might as well figure out a way to pay for them. So I worked with a dentist, scaled his business, did a little dentistry on my own face. It paid him to do so. And I realized, wow, that's now I can go into medical, disc jockey, voices. And then they say, how do you have a podcast with 500,000 listeners? And you're like, well, the ability to do different voices and to know how to scale different industries and mix music, it all comes together. But a lot of people won't take a job working at Lagoon Amusement Park for a low pay when they already have a lot of money. You were already making a lot of money, and you said, I'm going to go work at this job for minimum wage, not knowing there's even commission, and had a good attitude about it. Do you think that's a principle that people need to work to learn and not so much to earn? Is that something that's a principle you believe in, or what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. In fact, my advice right now is if you're a high school senior, take a gap year, maybe without COVID, but move to Las Vegas and attend every trade show. I believe that would be the best first year education you could possibly get.
My mind is blown. Right
That
now.
is
That
so
is such
powerful.
an amazing idea.
Real quick, mind blown. Just a
Yeah.
second.
That is a great idea.
I love that.
Well, and what I think that uninformed decisions are toxic. And I mean, when a kid's going to college and they say, what do you want to be? He has no clue.
True.
She has no clue
True.
about what the actuality of
Yes.
what's going on. And I just think that that's wrong. You got to get out and
Now-
mix it up.
This is something, certainly you don't need someone to pile on and be your hype man, but I just want to point this out. My wife went to college to do broadcast journalism because she's a beautiful lady. She's well-spoken. People are, oh, you should do, you're the make and model. You should do broadcast journalism. They forgot she doesn't want to. So she became a freshman, scored well. Sophomore scored well. Junior scored well. Senior, the senior year is the first year you get to hop up on the screen as an intern at a local TV station. And she found that every morning these people wake up, literally, and I'm not exaggerating. This is not me ripping mainstream media. This is just the reality. I'm ripping humanity. Humans want to hear about death, gossip, destruction, racism, violence, economic turmoil, bad weather. They just want to. So my wife wakes up every morning and her day starts with, we need someone to go find information about that homicide, about the tornado, about the economy falling up. This is back in 99. And she realizes these people then fight each other over who can get the scoop, who can get the story. And they go, tonight at 6, after the break, we'll be talking about the
If it
homicide.
bleeds, it bleeds.
And all of a sudden, you're you're one-upping each other about who has the worst thing that happened. And it was like depressing, and all the reporters were depressed, and they're all reading, Nolan, they're all reading teleprompters. And when you would sit down and ask them in the break room, what are your thoughts on that election? They would go, I don't know. I just read the teleprompter. No, I mean, it was just crazy. But she didn't have that epiphany till after $100,000 of education was invested. I love the idea of taking that gap year or interning. That's powerful. Do you have any other pro tips for the young people listening right now that are? Aaron's got a young man in his family who's going off to college.
Yeah.
So many listeners out there are thinking, do you have any other pro tips out there for the young people, 18, 19, 20, that are thinking about what should I do after high school?
Oh, absolutely. Intern whatever you can get. And for example, you go to a random office building if you're in the city and you knock on every door and say, I would like to intern here. I'll work for minimum wage and do whatever I want to learn your business. And and just do that. Just get a broad range of experiences,
That's good.
broad range of jobs. Kind of get in and figure it out. Also, start making a life plan with a spreadsheet of what things are going to cost versus what you're going to be making in whatever you do. And you can decide that you don't need to make a lot of money, but then you get a wife and a house and a kid and a dog, and you realize that you probably do need to make some money.
Right. Now, I don't want to dig too deep into your personal life there unless you want to go there. I just want to ask you, did you get married as a young guy? Did you stay single a lot? I mean, because you did so much.
I was married at 22 to a college sweetheart. That lasted for 7 years. And she hated me being an entrepreneur. She wanted me to be in college. She wanted me to be, I was still in college when we got married. We split up. And then right after I sold Atari, I met my current wife. She hates to be called my current wife, but sounds too temporary for her.
Right.
But we've been married for 42 years.
Wow.
And I have 8 children, 2 by my first wife and 6 by Nancy. And we have a great life. and it's great fun.
Now, Proverbs 13:20 reads, it says, "He that walketh with wise men shall be wise, but a companion of fools shall be destroyed." You might say, okay, you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And what I have found previous to this show, I have been super intentional since the age of, I'd say, 20 years old. I decided I am not going to hang around with people that have consistent self-inflicted life problems during the day. I'm just not going to. I'm going to surround myself with people that have goals and aspirations, and I'm going to who have positive conversations, period. And I have found that, when I'm in the room with Maurice Canbar, who invented Sky Vodka, or I'm in the room with David Robinson, the NBA Hall of Famer, or I'm in the room with a governor of a state, the conversations and the opportunities are so much better. And they're it's great. There's no gossip, no doom and gloom. It's positive. Oh, it's great. So who do you spend the most time with? Like, who are your homies? Who are your buddies? Who do you spend time with?
I have I'm a member of a group called Metal, and it started out sort of as a Saturday morning breakfast club where they'd have a couple of speakers and a bunch of it's called it's a men's group.
Men's group.
What's that?
It's a men's group. Is it like a religious thing, like a Christian men's group?
No,
is it a coders group?
In fact, we don't talk religion or politics.
Got it.
It's all about helping one another and learning about various things. And I'd say that there are several of the members there that I'm quite close with, that I do things with. Of course, my family. I'm finding that my oldest son is 42 now, and they're really, my kids are really smart.
It's awesome.
And they're part of my brain trust as well as my wife, and
Your current wife.
my
now the thing is, you have touched so many things. You went from Atari to Chuck E. Cheese. When did you feel like it was time to sell Atari?
I needed to sell Atari because the 2600 required so much more capital than I could raise at the time.
And when you said the 2600, that was a model?
Yeah, the Atari 2600.
Yeah, that's the Atari.
Yeah. Which, by the way, that $30 million a year, Clay, was $187 million when you look at inflation today.
So, Nolan, after you sold the company and you got a check, and I'm not going to ask you the amount. I'm not going to ask you how much you sold it for. But when you got the check or the checks, did you set it up where you were getting paid residually, or did you get one big check?
I got, for tax planning reasons, I got a debenture that gave me a big downstroke and then an amount of money for the next 8 years of a pretty good sized check.
When you finally got a big check, did you have a thing that you wanted to buy? Did you say, now that I have this nice check, I shall get myself a burrito? Whatever kind I want. I don't care. I'm getting extra guac. I'm doing the whole thing. Did you have a big goal like that? Did you have a thing you wanted to?
I did a thing where during the sale, I was spending a lot of time in San Francisco and, living in Los Gatos at the time. And I said, hey, instead of an hour and a half drive from San Francisco, why don't I just go from Atari and swing the compass around and get closer to San Francisco? And that came to an area called Woodside or Palo Alto.
Got it.
And I started looking for a house up there. And I found an old turn of the century mansion. It was called the Folger Estate. It was a 5-story house with a ballroom and all kinds of stuff.
Wow. On
16 acres, pool, what have you. But it was kind of decrepit. And I said, shit, I could do here. And I bought that. And it was just a wonderful house that I was determined to fill it up with kids.
And so you renovated that. So it was like a purchase, but it was also a problem you could solve. So you bought the house. When did you decide, hey, it's time to get into the cheese business, into the Chuck E. Cheese business? It's time to get into the. When did that happen?
It was actually before I sold Atari.
Oh, really?
I started Chuck E. Cheese inside Atari, And then after Warner bought it, they said, we don't want to be in the food business, and so they sold it to me. And so I had the technology, in the purchase and one location.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, I'm just going to replicate it, figure out what the things we did wrong on the first one, fix it. And, the first one was way too small. It was only 5,000 square feet. The next one was 25,000 square feet. That was too big. And then the third one was 13,000 square feet, and that seemed to be about right. And that was the template that we expanded with. Before
I open it up for the town hall for the guys here inside the studio to ask you any questions they want to ask, I want to ask you: are there, because you are in a different world than I'm in. You're in California. I'm in Oklahoma. We've interviewed, the founder of the former CEO of Pizza Hut or NBA Hall of Famer David Robinson. A lot of these neat people, but we have not really deep dived into the tech world because it's so far west. They're just not a lot. It seems weird, but geographically we have a lot of Midwest guests and a lot of East Coast. Are there certain people that you've rubbed shoulders with over the years where you go, Clay, you got to have that guy on your show? Is there somebody that's like an unknown, but you're going, this guy, because you've employed so many cool people that I'm sure have gone on to do big things. Is there anybody that you would just say they're an under? I mean, we all know the Zuckerbergs. We all know the big names, but is there somebody out there that you've kind of mentored up that you feel like's gone on to do some big things?
Oh boy, several people. I mean, Al Alcorn is a brilliant guy and fun.
Al Alcorn,
he was my head of research at Atari, and he later went to Apple and then did a stint with several other things, and he's done some neat stuff. I don't know if but I think Jim Clark is a brilliant guy.
Jim Clark. We share the last name, but I don't know who he is. Who's Jim Clark?
He did Health MD. He did what was the name of his company?
Health MD. We've all been there.
He also did Netscape.
And Netscape, a little company called Netscape.
Yeah.
You guys are amazing. I'm just... their background. I've never seen your office, but I thought it would look like this. So this is confirming. Now, Aaron Antis, you run Oklahoma's largest home building company. Mm-hmm. What question do you have here for Nolan here, the guy who's the founder of Atari?
Sure. So, I mean, first of all, honored to talk to you. Huge fan. Grew up on this. I did also want to point out that today, over the last couple of days, my son, I have an 18-year-old and a 19-year-old boys, and, of course, video games are prevalent in my home. And so my sons are trying to get the new PlayStation 5 right now, and it's, like, sold out, and you can't get it. And so the games that come out with that are always just, like, so amazing. It's what we dreamt of when Atari Pong was what we were playing. It was, like, what we thought video games could become. And so the funny part is I talk to my sons, and I say, now, when I was growing up, I played Pong, or I played Tank, and then eventually like Pitfall, and so many cool games. So, like, what inspired the game of Pong? Like, how did you go, I'm going to make a game that's these two little lines and a little, I guess, a ball, although it's a square because there's like 3 pixels on the screen.
A square ball.
Yeah. And, like, what inspired you to do that? Because it's literally... No, this is not meant to be an insult. It's the most well-known game that really isn't any good at all in comparison to what we have today. But my kids are like, oh, yeah, I know what Pong is. So what inspired that for you?
Pong really came, whenever you're getting into a business, the first thing you do is you list all the sports. And you say, we can do sports emulation and things like that.
True.
But Pong was actually inspired by a competitor, and I'd been in the video game business for a couple of years, and somebody said, "Hey, there's a company that's showing a video game in a hotel room," and so I went up, and it was the Magnavox Odyssey, and I looked at it, and the stuff was fuzzy and it didn't have any sound and no score, and I thought, oh yeah, this is really crappy. But I looked around and people were playing this game. It was kind of a Pong-like game, but it was silly because you could make the ball move after with a knob and stuff like that. And I thought to myself, okay, but people are kind of having fun with that game. And that happened to be the first day that Al came to work for Atari. And he needed a training project, something that was just butt simple to get through to learn all the tech. And I described the game to him, and I said, let's give it a go. And he had it programmed, he had it developed in about a week, a little less.
Wow.
And then we started tweaking it. And the more we tweaked it, the funner it got. And it was never, we never thought that it was going to be a marketable product. Then we did it, turned out to be so much fun. And then we put it on location, and it earned massive amounts of money.
How did you market your games? How did you market Pong and the different games that you created?
These were coin-operated games. So basically, you'd put it out in a bar, you'd collect the money after a week, and that was, they were income-generating machines. If the revenue that they earned got around, then there are these guys called, there's in every city, major city, there are 2 distributors, and they sell to a guy called an operator. This can be a retired, fireman who has 50 machines out in bars and restaurants, and they go into a bar and say, let me put my machine in and I'll give you half the revenue. And that's the business.
That's the move. That's the move.
Also, I wanted to know where did the name Atari come from? Because it's like, it sounds like maybe it's a space thing or something. Or I'm really curious, like, how did that name come about?
It came from the game of Go. And Atari, when you say Atari, it's like check in chess. It means your opponent is under threat, immediate threat. And I just thought that would be an appropriate name for a company to warn all my competitors that they are under threat.
Nice.
I love it.
Now I want to respect your time, so we have 3 questions in 5 minutes. Josh Wilson, this guy runs a company. They do outdoor irrigation systems. His company's called Living Water Irrigation, OK.com. There's a fly that's flying right by me. And Josh, what question do you have? I'm sure you grew up playing some Atari. What questions
we
do you
did.
have?
I had 2 older brothers, and it was a constant argument and fight. And it was great. Yeah. So you started a lot of fights in the Wilson household. So my mother is very grateful for that, Nolan.
This is true in my house too, John.
So, make you strong. Yeah. Make you strong.
Absolutely.
Walk away.
I have beat my brother with an Atari controller before.
That's a truth. I lost one of the paddles. Anyway, but we digress. So I thought that advice for young folks was absolutely one of the most powerful things we've ever heard on our show.
Yeah.
Of moving to Vegas for a year and going to all the trade shows.
Powerful.
So for a lot of our listeners or entrepreneurs who are actually living it right now, what would you advise them? What would that big piece of advice that you offered for young folks?
If somebody's maybe a young folk out there that owns a company
that's already operating, that's already doing
it,
and you obviously did it multiple times, Nolan. So what would you offer?
Always be a little paranoid, and figure out that if you're doing something successful, somebody's going to notice that you're doing something successful, think they can improve on what you're doing, and take you out.
Wow.
So you have to always be paranoid and say, what kind of company could take me out? And then you have to be that company. And I call it the eat your babies paradox, where, you have your baby, you nurtured it in terms of the concept of your company and everything like that. But every once in a while, you have to cannibalize that in order to move forward.
Wow.
The failure of Atari was they didn't they didn't move on with new technology. They thought they were a software company and that it would go on forever, because Warner put in all record executives, and they didn't realize that they were also in the record player business. And so when they didn't now we take it as a axiom that there's a new piece of hardware every 3 to 5 years. And at that point in time, I thought that the 2600 should be replaced in 2 to 3 years because there were so many trade-offs, and Warner didn't want to do it, and that was one of the reasons why I left.
Now, James, you're an attorney from Manhattan.
Yes, hi.
And you grew up. You were familiar with the Atari growing up as a kid, my friend.
Oh, for sure.
So,
Yeah.
what question would you have for Nolan, my friend?
Hi, Nolan. Nice to speak with you, and I agree with Alan. It is certainly Aaron. Excuse me. It is an honor to speak with you. The question I have is, was there ever any game or concept that was kind of on the drafting table that you decided to scrap, and then later, even decades later, thought about, man, that could have been a great idea, and if so, what was it?
Interesting question.
I think James is getting ready to launch a new, maybe a new console called Butari.
Yeah,
Right.
the
The Plan B
2700
version of
Yeah.
Atari. Yeah.
What a couple of things that I kind of put the kibosh on, and this will sound very quaint, is that I wouldn't allow Atari games to commit violence against a person. That you could shoot down a tank, you could shoot down an airplane, but you couldn't shoot a person. And
That's why it was
And that
Space
was-
Invaders instead of Face Invaders. Then probably.
yeah, and what I felt, believe it or not, the early days of the video game business, it was controversial. There were Senate hearings and
I
various.
remember.
Some countries outlawed video games.
It's
They
true.
thought they were bad for the people, bad for the employed, and not realizing that video games are kind of the training wheels of computer literacy. Like, I know no programmer that isn't a gamer, and so I just didn't want to add the idea of violence against people to that issue.
That's great.
I will say that there are a lot of studies that show that you might have had some wisdom in not wanting to do graphic violence against people. So you never know these things until years and years and years of research are done. But this is I appreciate that stance. I do. As a father of kids, I do appreciate that stance. Now we have time for one more question. This is Pastor Craig Hagan. He runs a church called Rhema Church. It's a mega church. They have thousands and thousands of members, and they've actually launched thousands of churches all across the world. And Craig, you probably grew up playing some Atari, right?
Oh yeah, I had Pong and I had the Atari 2600.
Oh.
We just called it the Atari,
Well, what
That-
final question would you have for Nolan Bushnell? Nolan Bushnell.
All right, I love Atari, and but I want to ask you a question about Chuck E. Cheese.
Oh.
My wife actually, her very first job was at Chuck E. Cheese, and she, sometimes she was Chuck E. Cheese, and it's just a phenomenal concept. I mean, my granddaughter, it's her favorite place to go, and I think it's because of Chuck E. Because there's other places that have kind of taken your concept and kind of maybe gone a little bit further, but she still likes Chuck E. Cheese better because of the mouse and all the figures. So what was kind of the idea and how'd you get the idea for the Chuck E. Cheese franchise?
It was really about vertically integrating towards the market. And we were selling video games, coin-operated video games at the time, for $1,500 to $2,000. But in their life cycle, they take $30,000 to $50,000 in coin drop.
Hmm.
So it didn't take rocket science to say I was on the wrong side of that equation. And so what I wanted to do was to create a chain of massive arcades and disguise it as a pizza parlor.
I love it. That's awesome. Brilliant.
Nolan.
And then I felt that the kids who were going to want to be in the game room, I had to keep the parents amused so that they'd stay longer. And so that's where the robotic animals came. If you listen to the scripts, they were all aimed more at adults than they were at kids. The birthday party, that was all for kids. But really it was to to make the game, the waiting time for the parents while they're sitting at the table less painful, less boring.
So give them something to do.
Brother, I appreciate you so much for being on the show. I know that you're a busy guy. You're always tinkering, working on projects, business deals, always committed to your family. And I really do appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to join us. And I'd like to ask you, is there a website where you would like to direct our listeners to visit to learn more about you? Or is there an action item you'd like our listeners to take? I know you're certainly not out there marketing yourself. You're not out there, trying to pitch a book. You're just doing this out of your own goodness of your heart. But
No. Here comes the commercial.
Okay, do it. Yeah,
bring it.
I'm working on a company called Versix, and we are going to have a Kickstarter for a game called Screen Test. And we're building board games, family games, that are enabled by the Amazon Echo and the Google Home. So now we have technology enhanced board games. So these smart speakers, they can throw the dice, they can add sound effects and music, they can time things, but more than that, they can provide a synthetic, verbal, non-playing character.
Wow. So if people want to learn more about that, they go to Kickstarter and then look at how do they...
I think it's going to be up in December 2nd, December 3rd.
And they'll look for Screen Test. You're calling it Screen Test?
Yeah.
Is that Versix? How do you spell that?
Virsix.
Okay.
Virsix. Nolan, it is a pleasure. I thank you for being...
I got one more.
No, do it. Yeah, no, do it.
I'm also on the board of a company called Perrone Robotics that has the best stack of software for automated automobiles, and they're just doing some wonderful things. And they're going to be doing a WeFunder, and I think that that an investment in there can be extraordinary, because it's one of the things that I've chosen, and I've got a pretty good hit record of picking winners. And the WeFunder will be up probably early December as well. So it's Perrone Robotics.
How do you spell Perrone Robotics?
Perrone.
What does Perrone mean?
It's his guy's name.
Okay. Name. Nice. Okay, so WeFunder, and it's Perrone Robotics. We can learn more about what you're doing there. We can invest there. And then there's Screen Test. You can check that out on Kickstarter as well. Both these our listeners should look forward to this in December. So I'll make sure that we release this show. When in December will these things come out?
It'll probably be the 5th or 6th, something like that.
Okay.
And also, our first game from Versix was Saint Noir, which was a detective game, and it's available on Amazon right now as well.
Brother, I appreciate you for being here. Thank you so much. You are an American icon, and you're just a treasure, and we learned so much on today's show. Thank you so much.
It's great fun being here.
Take care. And now, without any further ado, 3, 2, 1, boom!
Attend the world's best business workshop led by America's #1 business coach for free by subscribing on iTunes and leaving us an objective review. Claim your tickets by emailing us proof that you did it and your contact information to info@thrivetimeshow.com.